Chuck for a bug. Gharib H.P. Lovecraft English 5/6 2023. Abu Ghraib, a name that courses from the lips of all in Iraq with a taste of bitterness and terror. It was a bastion of horror, first commanded by Saddam Hussein, then by the Americans, who used it as a kind of political Alcatraz. But this was not the whole truth. Beneath the guise of interrogations and imprisonment, there was an ancient malevolence, a dark secret spreading like a plague in the darkest corners, a circle of beings that have existed since time immemorial, drawn from the darkest legends of antiquity, held court here. Vampires, cloaked in shadow and positions of power, used the misery of the prisoners as their personal feast of corpses. The arrival of a new prisoner was like fresh blood wetting the mouths of shots. Ali, a journalist who had committed the crime of uncovering the terrible truth about Abu Ghraib, was thrown into the beast's den. He was shoved into a cell he shared with another prisoner named Omar. Omar, a gaunt man whose eyes were mocked by many months of horror, warned Ali about the dark figures who played their monstrous symphony of death and torment at night. Ali, with his scientific mind and unwavering courage, initially rejected this absurd notion. He could not believe that such beings of the nightmare world could exist in reality. He was determined to remain strong and to look for a way to escape from this terrible place. But the reality of the darkness could not be denied. The screams, the nocturnal shadows, the icy coldness that blew through his cell, and a dreadful presence that reminded him of the cruelest fairy tales of his childhood. Omar huddled in a corner, his body trembling with fear, his voice whispering only the terrible words, "They are here." The cell door creaked. Two figures, pale as death itself, with red eyes that shone in the darkness, and sharp teeth protruding from their malicious grins, entered. They were the vampires, the lords of the darkness who hunted in the night. They mocked Ali and Omar, declared their hunger and their pleasure in tormenting the two. Ali struggled and screamed, but his words were only an echo in the endless walls of Abu Ghraib. The gods, who had either been seduced or intimidated by the vampires, were deaf to his cries for help. They were dragged into a room filled with victims, blood-smeared and broken by the vampires. Bound and exposed to horror, Ali and Omar were thrown onto a cold table, while the vampires drew their tools of death. They played with their food, torturing them with a morbid joy while they mocked and threatened that they would never escape the claws of terror. With every cut, every torment, Ali felt a pain that went beyond the physical, a burning in his soul. He could hardly believe what was happening to him, that there was such cruelty, and that he was helpless in the claws of the monster. With his eyes closed, he tried to overcome the pain, to focus on the things that were dear and precious to him. He thought of his family, his friends, his work, and the stories he wanted to write. He thought of those he loved and who loved him, of the dreams he still had, and the hopes he still carried within him. Amid the horrors, he thought about what made him. And despite the doom looming over him, he did not give up. Lying on the cold table of darkness, Ali felt his life, his blood, slowly flowing from his body. The world around him was a swirling darkness in which only the cruel laughter of the monsters and the desperate sobbing of Omar could be heard. Hope, once his faithful companion, had left him. Upon the chilling table of obscurity, Ali felt his existence, his vital fluid, gradually departing from his corporal form. The world around him was a whirlwind of Stygian blackness in which only the grotesque laughter of the fiends and the desolate sobs of Omar could be discerned. Hope, once his steadfast ally, had forsaken him. Then, in a singular moment that seemed expelled from eternity, reality detonated into light and pandemonium. The earth shuddered, cries and gunshots rent the shadows, and the table beneath him juddered. Ollie battled the encroaching darkness shrouding his consciousness and compelled his eyes open. The forms maneuvering in the room were no longer the appalling vampires, but soldiers clad in the uniforms of the Iraqi army and the United Nations. It was a rescue mission, a beam of hope piercing the murkiness of Abu Ghraib. These intrepid souls had stormed the prison, vanquished their own fears to liberate the captive spirits. They knew naught of the vampire horrors, yet they stood against them, armed with courage and resolve. Ollie could but observe as a soldier approached him, unlocking the shackles that chained him to the table. With a touch gentle yet firm, he was hoisted up and carried from the chamber of abominations. Words of solace were whispered in his ear, promises of safety and deliverance. It was barely conceivable that he had been rescued. He glanced towards Omar, who was also being unchained, a feeble smile on his bruised lips. The words exchanged between them were simple but saturated with significance. "We have survived." Freed from the chains of terror, they were ushered into an ambulance, provided with oxygen masks and intravenous lines. Their bodies were shattered, but their spirits held steadfast. They had achieved the impossible. They had survived. But as his body was healed, Ollie felt a transformation, a darkness that had nested within him. He felt cold and feeble. An insatiable thirst ignited within him. A darkness had slithered into his soul. He could not comprehend what had transpired. He could not know that the mark of the bite etched on his body was an indicator of his new, dreadful nature. He was ignorant of the dark gift that he had received from the vampires. He did not know what this transformation would mean for his existence. But amidst this transformation and the unknown dread, he knew one thing: he wanted to live. He wanted to be free. He wanted to narrate his tale. And so, despite all adversities, he chose to do what he was best at. He did not yield. When he observed the alterations within himself, Ollie absconded from the sterile refuge of the hospital. The insatiable thirst for blood, the eerie aversion to the glaring sun, the terrifying strength and speed he had never possessed before all pointed towards a ghastly truth. He had metamorphosed into a vampire. The fear of himself and his new, dark proclivities tormented him. The thought of inflicting pain on other living beings sent chills through him. The recollection of the vampires who had induced this dreadful transformation within him made him quiver. He knew they would seek him either to incorporate him into their vile fraternity or to extinguish his existence. Neither option appealed to him. The only salvation he envisioned was to flee into the barren desert. He purloined an automobile and drove aimlessly, avoiding bustling roads and cities. In search of a place of solitude, he sought refuge in an ancient Ottoman ruin, a long-forgotten prison, half buried in the desert sands, an ideal hideaway for Ollie, the outcast. He made his home in this place of desolation and oblivion, arranged a resting place in an underground cellar. He amassed various items and set up traps as well as alarms. This place became his sanctuary, his realm. Years passed with Ollie emerging from his hiding spot only at night to search for sustenance. Animals, stray travelers, none were safe from his thirst for blood. Despite the atrocities he committed, he felt not a twinge of guilt. Instead, this new existence fortified him, conferred upon him a sense of superiority, of power. He documented his experiences, his thoughts, his emotions in a diary. It contained his past as a journalist, his captivity in Abu Ghraib, his rescue, and eventually his flight into the desert. His hopes, fears, dreams, and plans all were encapsulated within these pages. It was his story, concealed in a secret compartment in his cellar, inaccessible to all. Ollie desired his secret, his kingdom, to remain undisturbed. But one day, after countless years of solitude, his sanctuary was intruded upon. A young archaeologist named Sami, in search of ancient ruins, had discovered the old prison and had arrived with a team of helpers and government approval to investigate it. Neither he nor Ollie knew of each other. And so Sami found Ollie's records when Ollie awoke in his dark hideaway, ready to defend his secret at any cost. A horror lurking in the shadows was prepared to emerge from the darkness. The ruins of Ollie's kingdom were no longer a place of oblivion, but the starting point of a new, ominous chapter in the history of Abu Ghraib.